onto the sofa together, a mixture of profound relief and simmering fury washing over them. They weren't robbed. They weren't being evicted. They were just living in a world managed by Stanley Roper, where logic was a foreign concept. Well, Jack said, looking at his roommates and letting out a long, shaky breath, since we're not homeless, who wants the rest of the Jimmy cake? I think that my part is the tastiest. Me, Chrissy said, her smile returning. As long as Jack doesn't cook anything else for at least 48 hours, Shauna added, finally leaning back and closing her eyes. Outside, the Santa Monica stars twinkled over the palm trees, and the sound of the ocean continued its timeless rhythm. In apartment 201, the lights stayed on, the laughter eventually returned, and for one more night, the three of them knew that no matter how chaotic the world became, they had each other, and in the mid-70s, that was more than enough. Chapter 10, The Monday Morning Fog. The morning after the rent fiasco brought with it a thick, gray Santa Monica fog that seemed to mirror the collective grogginess of apartment 201. The sun was a pale, struggling disk behind a curtain of mist, and the only sound in the apartment was the rhythmic drip of the leaky kitchen sink that Stanley had supposedly fixed. Jana was the first to emerge from her room, her hair in a messy bun, wearing a thick terry cloth robe. She looked at the Jimmy cake sitting on the counter now little more than a pile of crumbs and a smear of blue icing, and sighed. The adrenaline of the previous night had vanished, leaving only a dull ache in her temples and the dawning prospect of a full day at the flower shop. Coffee, she muttered to the empty kitchen. The world doesn't move until the coffee does. She was halfway through measuring the grounds when Jack staggered out of his room, looking like he'd been through a minor war. He was wearing his favorite culinary genius apron over a pair of mismatched pajamas. "Is the coffee screaming yet?" Jack asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. "It's thinking about it," Jana replied, not looking up. "You look terrible. Jack, did the hero of the pub have a restless night?" "I kept dreaming about that giant," Jack admitted, leaning against the counter. "In the dream, he was the judge at my final cooking exam, and he kept telling me my hollandaise sauce was uncivilized. Then he tried to eat my whisk. At least it wasn't a nightmare about Stanley," Jana noted, "though I'm still not sure which is worse." As the smell of brewing coffee began to penetrate the morning air, Chrissy floated into the room, looking surprisingly bright for 7:30 a.m. She was already dressed in her secretarial suit, her blonde hair perfectly pinned. "Good morning, roommates," she chirped, oblivious to the heavy atmosphere. "Did you hear the news? The fog is so thick the seagulls are walking to the beach." "That's fascinating, Chrissy," Jana said, finally pouring a mug and handing it to her. "But let's try to keep the enthusiasm to a dull roar until I've had at least 3 of these." "I was thinking about the rent," Chrissy continued, taking a sip. Since Mr. Roper already took it, does that mean we're technically ahead for next month? Jack and Johnny exchanged a look. No, Chrissy, Jack explained gently. It means we're caught up for last month. We're still broke. Just legally broke. Oh, Chrissy's face fell for a fraction of a second before brightening again. Well, at least we don't have to worry about burglars anymore. Mr. Roper is much more efficient than a thief anyway. Chapter 11, The Gourmet's Gamble. Later that morning, after the girls had left for work, Jack found himself staring at a textbook on French pastry. His culinary school exam was approaching, and the safe life he was leading was beginning to feel like a pressure cooker. He needed to prove he wasn't just a guy hiding from a landlord, he was a chef. He decided to spend his day off perfecting a soulful au grand marnier. It was a dish that required precision, timing, and an oven that didn't have a personal vendetta against him. "All right, oven," Jack whispered, adjusting the dial. "This is a partnership. You provide the heat, I provide the talent. No sudden drops in temperature, or I'll trade you in for a microwave." He worked with a focused intensity, his hands moving with a grace that would have surprised anyone who had seen him trip over the beaded curtain. He whisked the egg whites until they formed stiff, glossy peaks, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment, the farce of apartment 201 disappeared. He wasn't a fake roommate. He was a creator. The apartment began to fill with a heavenly centaurine zest, vanilla, and the sweet promise of success. But just as the soulful was beginning its delicate rise, a heavy, rhythmic thumping started from the apartment below. Thump, thump-y-thump. "No," Jack hissed, looking at the oven door. "Stanley, whatever you're doing, stop it." The thumping grew louder. It sounded like Stanley was trying to install a bowling alley in his living room. The floorboards vibrated, and the delicate structure inside the oven began to quiver. Thump! A loud crash echoed from below, followed by a muffled string of curses from Stanley Roper. Jack watched in horror as his masterpiece, the crowning achievement of his morning, slowly, tragically collapsed into a sad, orange-scented puddle. "My soulful!" Jack cried, sinking to his knees in front of the oven. "It's been assassinated." He was still mourning the loss when a key turned in the lock. Stanley Roper burst in, holding a plunger like a scepter. "Tripper, I knew you were up to something. I can smell it from the courtyard." "It's a soulful, Mr. Roper," Jack moaned, not moving. "Or at least it was before you decided to declare war on your ceiling." "I was fixing the pipes," Stanley shouted, ignoring the ruined dessert. "The pressure was building up. I had to vent it. And you're using too much gas. I can see the meter spinning like a top." "I was studying," Jack argued, standing up and wiping flour onto his apron. "I have an exam." "Study in the library," Stanley snapped. "They got books. They don't have ovens. And another thing, tell that blonde one that if she's gonna walk in her sleep again,